Hello, Dave Hanson here. Um, so glad that you've all come to TechCon this year. It's an auspicious year for us. It's our 30th year in North America. I'm so glad you're here to join us. Um, Michelle asked me if I could share some reflections with you about our 30 years of TechCon. And so if you have the patience to bear with me, I'd like to do that for a few moments. Take me a second to launch this and then we'll be on our way. I didn't realize when Michelle asked me this what a daunting task this would be. 30 years, you collect an awful lot of information and stories and photos and recollections. Makes you quite wistful and very sentimental, to be honest. But as I looked at it all, I realized that there was far too much to try to encapsulate everything into this reflection. What I realized also was that after 30 years, there are probably a lot of people that don't know our story, where we come from, how we got to where we are. So I thought it would be useful to have a brief history of TJH2B and then a little bit about how TechCon came together. TJH2B started as a contract research project at California State University in Sacramento back in 1972. Sacramento Municipal Utility District had had a transformer failure that had killed some folks, and they were quite distraught and were aware of work that was going on in Europe, and they came to the university in hopes that they could recreate that work for safety, not necessarily for diagnostics. So the project was started in 1972. It ran very successfully, which is a long story in itself, until 1978, when the research was essentially done and the project had become basically a service for fee running through a nonprofit research organization on the campus. So in June 30th of 1978, it was transferred out to a company called Analytical Associates that was formed to take it over. And on July 1st, 1978, it began service. It ran for the next 17 years, and I was both part of the project and part of that company. Ran for the next 17 years until September the 4th, 1995, when it ceased operation and TJH, to be Analytical Services, began on on the 5th of September in 1995. A lot of people wonder where in the heck we got this name, TJH2B. It's a mouthful, isn't it? Well, that's another story that it's one that we should talk about over a beer sometime, but I'll give you the quick and dirty on it. It's the initials of the principles of the business. So Ted Halpert was the really the major principal owner, and so his initials were used as the TJ followed by a slash and the H for Halpert. The second H is me, Dave Hanson. I'm fortunate to have an H. So I became the second H, so that's H2. Burns and Brune, David Burns and John Brune were both B's, and so they were given the B in the formula there. But because they were minority shareholders, they were given lowercase b's. And we didn't want to have the R2D2 sound, so we left the second two off. And the two was meant to modify in both directions. A lot of you have never probably seen any of these people. This is Ted Halpert on the left and David Burns on the right. They've both retired. And Brune, this is John Brune, and he has also retired. So as it stands today, I'm the only original principal left in the business. Way back when, we decided that it would be valuable to have a conference. We wanted to contribute something back to the industry and try to create a forum for sharing. Originally, it was decided that it would be a forum for sharing information about transformers through their entire life cycle, from installation to scrapping essentially. And as time went on, it became clear that we needed to include the ancillary components, tap changers, bushings, and whatnot, and other substation equipment like circuit breakers and so forth. Um, and then it became, obvious that there were broader issues that impacted the equipment in the world, and we should also include those. Um, for those who are a little bit longer in the tooth, you may remember some of these, and the younger of you may not, but this is just a brief waltz through some of the major issues that occurred for us through all of those years. PCBs were big through the 70s, but all the way into the 90s. So as we started TJHW, PCBs were still on the horizon. Static electrification had arisen and was being observed and understood. Reliability center maintenance came along. This was something out of the airline industry that proved to be important for utilities. California decided to participate in the deregulation model, and so we went through some real hiccups in California as a result of that. Hopefully, the rest of the country took the lesson away. Condition-based maintenance came along. SARS in Asia arose, and it impacted the Asian market much more than anywhere else. But it did provide perhaps a clue or a cue as to how pandemic sorts of diseases might be affecting the industry and how they might be dealt with. Coking, particularly in tap changers in North America, because of their position on the low side, became a concern. Bubble formation was a concern. Monitoring was going through its entire evolution in the industry, major, and still is occurring today. Renewables were coming along, wind and solar, and how that was going to be integrated into the system. Corrosive sulfur came into discussion as certain kinds of transformers and certain kinds of situations started to fail. Energy storage has become a bigger and bigger issue, particularly with renewables. Facility security has been gaining in importance as people have attacked or assaulted various substations. And then COVID, of course, rose to create quite a bit of distress as we managed our way through operating the industry. So those are some of the major concerns that have appeared. There are others as well, but it gives you the idea how this is, going away from directly discussing some of the issues we talked about as our main purpose. We know that we've had 30 TechCon North America conferences, and there's no need to go through all of these. But you may or may not know that we have had considerably more TechCons worldwide. We've had 30 TechCons in North America, 20 in the Asia Pacific market in Australia, 17 in Europe, mostly you're all in the UK, 3 in Southeast Asia, 2 in Canada, and even 1 in Saudi Arabia, for a total of 73 TechCons worldwide. So we've been at it for quite a while and have a lot of experience working with people all over the world. This is the only aggregate picture I have of all of the speakers at one of our conferences. So I just want to show you the kind of range of people that would be appearing at these conferences worldwide. I'll do a quick run through of names here, and you might recognize some of them. Some are still active in the industry. Ted Halpert on the far left. Behind him is Tony McGrail, at that time from National Grid in the UK, then to America Now Doble. John Wysocki, who was with PG&E. The fellow behind, we don't know. The next fellow over is Russ Crutcher, a microscopist who did an awful lot of work with us. Then next in front is Carl Feely from Victoria in Australia. Behind is Tom Breckenridge from Scotland. Then there's Viktor Sokolov from the Ukraine. In front, Saki van Wyk from South Africa. The next fellow behind, we don't know. The next fellow over, who's a bit short, is Ken Buden from Australia. David Hughes is next from EA Technology. Then further on is Harold Moore, chief designer at Westinghouse and then ABB. Uh, uh, Dennis Allen, who is a chief designer at the Stafford factory that seemed to change ownership often. The next fellow over is Jim Fivey, who is with Peoples Electric, again, I think a chief designer. The next over is Sam Hall, who was with the National Grid. Then Ernst Knoll, who started out at Elin in Weiz, Austria, and then wound up with Schmidt in the last I heard was with Schmidt in the Netherlands. The next fellow over, I'm not sure of. And the next is Martin Heathcote. He's the editor for the J&P Transformer book, or was anyway. And the last fellow, I'm not sure. Just an example of the kinds of people that would be invited to speak at a conference. You can see it's very transformer heavy here. As time went on, that shifted a little bit to some other aspects of the industry, but certainly a good example of the kind of conference that we would put together. Historically, we have what what I would consider to be a reasonable resume of things that we've done to support the industry. Clearly, we've had several thousand delegates come for our conferences and training. We've helped experts travel around the world to share their knowledge, and because of our reach internationally, it's been a real pleasure to help share that knowledge around the world. We have, in multiple countries, promoted consecutive SIGRE events at our conference venues in an effort to support SIGRE in their symposia and also with their national committee meetings. We helped launch the Philippine National Committee for SIGRE. That was through the Australian National Committee. For a time, we promoted consecutive EPRI conferences that were held in New Orleans while we were in New Orleans. And we also worked with sponsoring a young engineer program through TechCon because of the apparent depletion of engineers being available to enter the power industry. All things that we think are pretty valuable, and it's our hope, of course, that we'll continue to be able to provide support for the industry. It's really important while you're at TechCon to engage with people, engage with anyone and everyone that you can there. And if you have questions, be forthright. Just put them out there. This is a wonderful case in point. The gentleman with his hand up and his hand down on the valve is Don Platts. Don, very intelligent man who oftentimes stood up in meetings and asked the questions that maybe other people didn't want to hear. But he was genuine in his concern for doing the right thing and understanding how things worked really well. Here he was looking at sampling equipment for taking samples out of transformers. And he was concerned because the valve types on transformers have changed over the years. And he thought the original ones were designed to keep air from entering the transformer, but wasn't so sure about later ones. So here he is posing the question to us, where does the air go? So we sat down and we conducted a research project with Don. It resulted in the publication of a paper, Where Does the Air Go?, that is available to you if you're interested. Talk to Michelle or talk to Herman, and they'll be happy to make sure that you get a copy. By the way, to the right of the picture there, that's Tom Prevost, a great fellow, and I've enjoyed working with him very much. If you know him, you probably enjoy him as well. So, not to belabor the conference production cycle, there is a series of things that we have to go through because we're the producers of it. We have to go through and bring to fruition in order to have a successful conference. One of those things is a planning meeting. And so every year before our conference, we have a planning meeting that is designed to help choose the topics for speaking, for training, maybe for panels and so forth. If you're interested in participating in a planning meeting, you should talk with Herman and see what might be available. Interesting things happen at planning meetings. So oftentimes there's a tour. And at this particular planning meeting, it turns out there was a tour of a brewery. This brewery was chosen because it's an almost fully automated brewery. Very few people work here, but tremendous amounts of beer is brewed here. And it runs pretty much automatically, and it uses renewable energy in order to help cut the electricity costs. So here we are taking a tour. Um, those of us who are chemists, of course, enjoyed this part. This is where the brewing actually happens in the Lauderdale. The fermentation process happens here. But for the engineers, this was probably just as interesting. Because it's so fully automated, much like other automated systems, it has a control room. Mind you that in this brewery, there's probably 3 stories filled with these large steel tanks, and beer is moved back and forth and up and down until it has completed its aging cycle and is ready to be bottled. Well, the engineers looking at this were very curious, just as they would be in any control room, and so they started asking questions. Happily, the fellow running the control room decided that it would be okay to take the system off autopilot for a few moments and demonstrate a few details of this system. Well, these engineers had him drilling down in all sorts of directions until someone heard him say, "Uh-oh." And that was the end of his demonstration. And then there was a bit of dismay as he attempted to pull everything back together again. Well, we wished him well, but we moved on. And we toured the multiple stories of this facility filled with tanks like this. I think all of these tanks contain something on the order of 60,000 gallons. There are 3 stories of this in multiple bays on each floor. There's a lot of beer that's made here. And you'll notice there's no one standing around. This is all happening in pretty much an automated fashion. Beer flows from one place to another through that control room's controls. Very interesting. Eventually, they wound us down to a place where they have built in this spigot that had a little valve on it so that we could taste some of the product just before bottling. So happily, we were lining up to do this when someone noticed just on our left there that there was a tank that was leaking curiously. Was this the reason for the uh-oh? Well, we think it was. So as it focuses in, you'll get an idea of just how this turned out. That little porthole suddenly opened up and let its 60,000 gallons of beer loose. We all had to run in order to escape the flood of beer, and we successfully did. And I think we ultimately confirmed that this was the uh-oh. We probably won't be invited back. Um, if you're talking to people at the conference, you should do your best to get to understand what they do and what they know and how they can help you. I've found that virtually everyone at the conference has a specialty of knowledge and capability that can be really valuable to you. I have learned so much from the hundreds of people that we've met through the years, and some of them have remained in close contact, which is the thing you should try to strive for as well, to maintain that contact and have these good networks and associations. What we've also discovered is that there are hidden talents amongst these folks. This fellow is Peter Cole. He's from Sydney, Australia. And it turns out he's a rock musician. And he's now played, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen times as the band for our conference dinners in Australia. This fellow is Armando Bassetto. He's from Campinas, Brazil. He used to work for CFFL, but now he works for himself. Curiously, at one of our early conference dinners, Ted Halpert decided that he would tease him, and he made an announcement to the conference dinner that Armando Bassetto would now sing "The Girl from Ipanema" in Portuguese. Ted fell over because Armando, unbeknownst to him, had been taking operatic voice lessons. He got up and he sang "The Girl from Ipanema" in Portuguese a cappella. We learned then that he was taking these lessons and that he very much liked Andrea Bocelli and Conte Partiro or Time to Say Goodbye. And as a result of that, at all the conferences that he attended worldwide for us after that, he closed the conference with Time to Say Goodbye. And then there's Tom Breckenridge from Scotland. You wouldn't know it to look at him necessarily, but it turns out he is a extremely good bagpipe player and has played in international competitions and won many times. He also has a small informal bagpipe band that he has in well, I guess it was in Edinburgh, but he now lives in Germany. But it turns out that he was very happy to pipe with himself or with his band to pipe us into our dinners and our conference openings and so forth. So Tom opened for us, Armando closed for us, and Peter Cole played music for our dinners. Well, a brief look at the last 30 years, and I've tried to keep it short so that you can get on about the real business that you're there for. Um, Again, thank you so much for coming. Debbie Halpert, Herman Vogel, Ted Halpert, and I, and all of the people at TGH2B hope that you have a very successful conference and that you have good fortune in all of your endeavors throughout your career. From all of us to all of you, cheers.